did do is do a big part of unraveling the Clinton surpluses that Democrats helped to create and drive an enormous amount of the debt that we are realizing and debating on today. So, Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that that column be included in the record.
Without objection.
And, Mr. President, this is a time to make sure that there is a vote on this Senate floor on a budget that ends the fiscal year, that encapsulates the $78 billion in cuts, that strips out social riders that have nothing to do with the budget, that preserves a woman's preventative health care services, and that moves the country forward in terms of its economic advancement, creating jobs, and making sure that we don't get thrust back into a recession. That's what this debate is all about. That's what the vote should be about today. Mr. President, I know members of the Democratic caucus stand ready to do exactly that. With that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President. Mr. President, I can only imagine that the American people who are watching this drama unfold here in Washington, D.C. are scratching their head, are confused, and are wondering why it is that Congress can't perform one of its most basic functions, and that is make sure that the government continues to operate. But I'm also reminded of an adage from the days that I practiced law and then presided as a judge in the courtroom. If you can't convince them, confuse them. And whether it's inadvertently or intentionally or just by mistake, I think there's a lot of confusion being encouraged and propagated here on the floor. The fact of the matter is there are three things that we're talking about. One is there is the continuing resolution that the House of Representatives passed and sent over here some time ago, which would fund the federal government through the end of the fiscal year. That's one thing. There's a second thing, which is a bill that was sent over yesterday that would fund the government for one more week and the Department of Defense for the remainder of the fiscal year, that the Majority Leader has the power to bring to the floor today and to have us vote on this afternoon or tonight. But the President of the United States has sent out a veto message saying he would veto it. And then the third thing that's being discussed, and maybe the most confusing of all, is when Speaker Boehner says it's all about the money, and Majority Leader Reid says, no, it's about the policy riders. Well, I would submit that it is about the money, and it's not about objections to policy, which 49 of our Democratic friends have voted for in the past, which has been signed into law by President Clinton and been signed into law by President Obama himself. But the real casualties of this dysfunction here and the inability of Congress to get its work done, unfortunately, falls to our men and women in uniform. In my state, a large Army installation, as the presiding officer knows, is located in Killeen, Texas at Fort Hood. And on November the 5th, 2009, tragedy hit Fort Hood when Major Hassan killed 13 people in what can only be described as a domestic act of terrorism. Shortly after that, a number of our military were deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan and are now in the process of returning. The three Corps soldiers are finally returning from Iraq, and individuals like Specialist Kevin Gallagher of Tiger Squadron, 3rd Armored Cavalry Regiment, who is a Purple Heart recipient, is just back from Iraq, coming back from Iraq. Soldiers of the 20th Engineer Battalion, the 36th Engineer Brigade, are returning to Fort Hood from Afghanistan. And I wonder what they are thinking now, along with their families, when, as a result of the federal government dealing with its most basic responsibilities, they're not going to get paid starting tomorrow unless the Majority Leader takes up the temporary bill that was passed yesterday in the House and sent over here, and we vote on it today to make sure that our troops and their families continue to get funded and get the pay that they so richly have earned and which they deserve. We've heard, as I said, a lot of talk about riders, but the only thing that's contained in this bill that could be called a policy rider, about which there appears to be some confusion, is one that 49 Senate Democrats have voted on in the past, a spending bill with regard to abortion funding in the District of Columbia. President Obama has signed it into law, President Clinton has signed that into law, and 49 of our Senate Democrats have voted for it in the past, yet this becomes somehow the obstacle to paying our troops what they have earned. I would say the argument really sounds like we will not fund our troops because we can't fund abortions in the District of Columbia. I think it's a terrible shame and really I think galvanizes public opinion about everyone in Washington. I think the President's wrong and his political advisors are wrong if they think a government shutdown is going to help Democrats and help him get reelected and hurt Republicans. I think people are saying a pox on all your houses. You need to work together to solve problems. You need to work together to cut spending, to cut the deficit, deal with the unsustainable debt, and you need to get on with it now. The fact of the matter is we continue to spend 40 cents out of every dollar here in Washington as borrowed money. And we know that the debt being held by the public, this is under the President's own budget proposal, would go up to, in 2019, it would double in 5 years, it would triple in 10 years, because the President himself, obligated as he is under the Budget Act to send over his requested budget, does nothing to deal with the debt crisis that is threatening our nation, threatening our prosperity and threatening our freedom. And as China continues to loan us money, we are subject to the tender mercies of a country that I submit we do not want to be subject to the tender mercies of. We need to deal with this. I think, unfortunately, the President and some of my friends across the aisle have been very critical of the proposed budget of Congressman Paul Ryan in the House, but at least he tries to deal with reality, with the hand we've been dealt, or the hand in which some of us have created, and the President himself ignores his own Fiscal Commission report that came out in December of 2010. Here's what the wall of debt looks like unless we deal with this problem. According to the President's own budget, it gets worse and worse and worse. In 1997, it was roughly $5 trillion. Now we're looking at about a $14 trillion debt. And if we don't do anything about it, if we continue business as usual here in Washington and don't cut spending and deal with the structural and systemic problems facing us and our debt crisis, it's going to continue to get worse and worse and worse. Well, this is another sobering chart. This shows when we borrow the money, we have to pay interest to the people who buy that debt. And this chart shows that the interest paid by 2021, this is the last year of the President's proposed budget, that the amount of money paid in interest, and this is at assumed rates, which are now very low, are $931 billion, more than transportation, more than defense, and more than Medicare. And we've been told by the experts that if interest rates were to go up, if, for example, we incur a period of inflation, that this number could explode into multiples of this figure, putting us into a death spiral, economically speaking, and we could end up like Greece or Portugal. The only problem is there's nobody out there to bail out the United States of America. The only one that can stop this is us. Secretary Geithner said that the debt limit ceiling has to be raised sometime in the period between middle May and July. That is the big event. What we're talking about now is a preliminary skirmish albeit very important. And I will tell you, Mr. President, I do not intend to vote to increase the credit card limit of the federal government unless we can get systemic reform that will deal with this very real problem. I would say that one of those ways to do that would be to pass a balanced budget amendment. All 47 senators on our side have now agreed to a constitutional amendment provision that would require a balanced budget, and we hope that our friends across the aisle will join us in passing it. Last time this was considered, we came within one vote in 1997 of passing a balanced budget amendment, and the deficit was $107 billion. Now it's $1.5 trillion. The debt was around $5 trillion, and now it's $14 trillion. So if it was compelling enough that it came that close to passage in 1997, how much more compelling is the evidence that we need to pass a balanced budget amendment to the Constitution? So I hope, Mr. President, in closing, that cooler heads will prevail tonight, that those who seek political advantage by the game of gotcha, which is a world-class sport here in Washington, D.C., will forbear and allow us to get on with the really big fights, which are dealing with this unsustainable debt, these huge deficits, and not threaten the paycheck of the men and women who wear the uniform of the United States, who are fighting 3 wars around the world, and whose families are calling my office, and Mr. President, I would guess they're calling your office, the Senator from Michigan, the Senator from New York, and saying, what are you doing, and why can't you get this taken care of so we don't have to add this to the list of burdens that we must bear while our loved ones are away fighting America's wars? I yield the floor.
The Senator from Michigan.
Thank you, Mr. President. First, Mr. President, I would ask unanimous consent that at 4 p.m. the Majority Leader be recognized.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, I would agree with my colleague, my friend from Texas, about the fact that people are scratching their heads. I know the people in Michigan are wondering what in the world is going on right now when we are still trying to recover from a recession, and we have a long ways to go for most Americans, even though the unemployment rate has come down substantially in Michigan. We were at one point 15.7%. That's just what you count in terms of unemployment, and now it's 10.7 and going down, but still way, way, way too high. And families underwater, their houses underwater, they're trying to recover in terms of their incomes and hold it together and look for new work or job training, and, you know, what about the kids in college and all that comes with that. In the middle class, maybe struggling to get in, stay in the middle class, get into middle class. Small businesses wondering what the heck is going on around here when, you know, they're trying to, hopefully folks who've held on through the recession, trying to come back, trying to invest, trying to keep the doors open, hire more people, and they're wondering what in the world is going on here. We're in a situation where these negotiations have now just become so political and the discussion so unrelated to what the budget's about, and most importantly, to what people care about, because the political piece of this now about pulling in issues around women's health care are distracting from getting a 6-month budget done, which is distracting from what we really ought to be talking about, which is jobs and the economy and putting people back to work and supporting small businesses to get the capital they need to be able to grow. So we're in a situation now where the whole process has been politicized to the point where it's extremely disappointing to me and extremely concerning. And what the bottom line ends up being is that middle-class families, veterans concerned about their disability claims, or seniors concerned about their Social Security or Medicare claims, or small businesses who are putting together loan applications, or somebody trying to close on their house with FHA, is being held hostage to politics that have nothing to do with the budget. Nothing to do with the budget. This latest distraction, which is over breast cancer screenings and cervical cancer screenings for women and girls, is just another in a long list of distractions from the budget crisis, and most importantly, from the focus that we need to have on creating jobs. You know, we have all agreed that Washington, just like every family, has got to change the way it does business, has got to focus on cutting the things that aren't important, to focus on the things that are. Every dollar that's being paid, every taxpayer giving a dollar has found that it's a lot harder to earn that dollar and to give that dollar, and we better be taking good care of that and stretching it as far as possible and focusing it on the things that are most important, because those dollars are hard to come by these days, and that's the reality. And so we have come together. It's been a long time in coming, but we have come together. We've agreed on significant spending cuts, changes, while keeping a focus on education, innovation to grow for the future. And now at the 11th hour, all of the sudden, what was agreed to in terms of significant spending cuts to allow us to balance, to bring the budget together and focus on deficit reduction, somehow that's gone, and we're now talking about whether or not women's health care will be funded in this country, whether or not women are going to be able to receive blood pressure checks, cancer screenings, and other preventative care efforts. Is that really what this is about? Are we really going to hold middle-class families and small businesses and veterans hostage over blood pressure checks for women? Cancer screenings for women? Really? Is that what this is about? Stunning. This is absolutely stunning. You know, in the great state of Michigan, women's health clinics that are at this point proposed for elimination provided 55,000 cancer screenings last year, and there were 38,800 abnormal results. Women who found out those results early were able to detect their cancers early and get the life-saving treatment that they needed to save their lives. Could be your mom, your grandmother, your daughter, your friend, your neighbor, somebody at church. So is this really about telling women in communities across Michigan, in Marquette, Muskegon, Burton, Owasso, Three Rivers, that they can't get their breast cancer screenings? Telling women in Flint, in Grand Rapids, and Ypsilanti, and Sturgis that they can't get their cervical cancer screenings? Telling women in Warren, and Brighton, and Big Rapids, and Battle Creek they can't get their blood pressure checked or their cholesterol tested? Are Republicans really planning to shut down the government and hold middle-class families and veterans hostage in order to stop breast cancer screenings and cholesterol checks? Unbelievable. I think it's shameful. You know, it is time to come together and get this budget done. As I understand it, there was an agreement last night on the level of spending cuts. We need to get this done and move on. Move on to the real focus and debate that we need to be having about how we grow the economy and compete in a global economy. You know, Mr. President, I think there could be a lesson learned from what people in my state have gone through and done in the last couple of years. You know, we did not give up on the American automobile industry, and with the support and help of our President and members here, despite some incredibly tough times and difficulties in terms of cutting back that had to take place. We did not give up. Workers sacrifice cutting starting pay in half. Retirees, the companies, the shareholders, communities, everybody got together and said, you know what, we know there's a big problem here, and we're going to get this fixed, and we're going to sacrifice together. And then we did a really important thing with the support of people here and the President, and I'm very grateful for it. We then said, you know what, we're going to invest like crazy in innovation. And because we did that, that combination of resetting the budget and the finances for the auto industry, and then investing in innovation with the great help of our wonderful engineers and skilled labor force and a whole lot of smart people that came together with battery investments and retooling loans that are bringing jobs back from Mexico now, and investments in new advanced manufacturing. We're not only growing, and for the first time since 1999, the American company is making a profit, but we're winning awards. We're winning all the awards for top quality, the great vehicles of the future. I would suggest that that would be a good model for us. Come together about what we need to do to push the reset button, to be able to come together, to be able to get our arms around spending and balance the budget and tackle the deficit, and then invest like crazy in the future, in innovation and education and rebuilding America. So, Mr. President, I would just say that this is extremely concerning to me today where we are, because instead of talking about how we compete in the global economy, instead of talking about the United States versus China, which is what we should be talking about, or Germany or India or Korea, we're at a place where we're talking about whether or not the federal budget and middle-class families will be held hostage in order to stop
The senator's time has expired.
in order to stop cancer research for women in this country. I would urge that we come together. Thank you.
The senator from Nebraska.
Mr. President, thank you. I rise today to speak, of course, on the budget issues we are facing, the continuing resolution, all of the issues that have been talked about over the last week or so. Mr. President, oftentimes when I speak on the Senate floor, I talk about what it's like back home in Nebraska. I do so because I'm enormously proud of my state, and it just seems that our state does so many things right. And so again today I'm going to take a moment or two to get started here and talk a little bit about that and my experience in dealing with budget issues. I had the great honor at one point to serve a couple of terms as mayor of a really great city, the community of Lincoln, Nebraska. And it was a strong mayor form of government, and so each year I would have the responsibility of preparing a budget and submitting it to a 7-person city council who would take it apart and put it back together, and I would work with them to get a budget done. It never occurred to me, Mr. President, that as mayor of that city I had the ability not to do a budget. I can't imagine walking into a State of the City address and saying to the good people of Lincoln that after giving it some thought, I had decided that it was going to be a situation where I would not be submitting a budget for consideration of the City Council. This never occurred to me. You know, I look at that community today led by a mayor who is very capable, happens to be of the other political party than I am, and that community has the lowest unemployment rate of any community in the United States. Why? because people take a pretty conservative view of things. In fact, in preparing that budget, we would literally go item by item, police cars, police salaries, fire engines, whatever, and literally list them item by item and then the amount. And at some point there would be a line drawn through the page where we had spent all of the money that we had. All of the money available that year was spent. And so everything below that line wasn't funded. And if I looked below that line, or a council member did, and we said, well, look, we want more done here. We want to fund that item. Well, then we had to go above the line and find the money in another program, or we had to raise taxes. And those were really the choices we got. Well, after that, I had the great honor of serving the state of Nebraska as its governor for 2 terms. And actually, the budget process didn't differ that much. Each year, as governor, I would submit at the start of the year a budget to our Nebraska unicameral, and I would deliver a State of the State address where I would talk about priorities or budget issues, whatever I chose to talk about as governor. There were 3 things I could guarantee the citizens each year. Number 1, that a budget would be submitted and it would be approved. Number 2, we would not borrow any money to balance that budget, because you see, our Constitution essentially prohibits elected officials at the state level from borrowing money. And the third thing was that the budget would in fact be balanced. You see, we didn't have the option of going out to the bond market and issuing debt to mask the lack of discipline to get the spending under control. We really, again, had just a few choices. Choice number 1 is we could cut spending. Choice number 2 was we could raise taxes. And choice number 3, we could do some of both. I always favored the cut spending piece, because if revenues were down, it told me that people were earning less and they were spending less. And because of that, less money was coming into the state treasury. And why should I, as governor, go out and beat them up some more by raising their taxes? Well, I, as you know, spent a 3-year period of time as Secretary of Agriculture, and I was given a budget by the Congress. It never occurred to me that I should spend more than what was allocated to me. I would always tell my sub-cabinet and my cabinet when I was governor, look, this isn't magic, it's math. And if the math doesn't work, then we have to come to grips with this. Well, in all due respect to my colleagues who have come to the floor throughout the day and they've talked about what this process is or isn't and whether funding is going to be done for this program or what rider is there, all I want to say is this. What we're finally focused on in this great nation is what we should have been focused on decades ago, and that is we are spending more than is coming in, and every dollar overspent is put on a credit card. And it doesn't go away. It won't be canceled at my death. I've been going across our state with charts and graphs to try to illustrate this point. I turned 60 this year. When I was a 20-year-old man, our government owed $380 billion. Now, I'm sure at that point in time, many argued that that was way too much debt. The projections are, under the Obama plan, President Obama's plan, that by the end of this decade, on my 65th birthday, we will owe $20 trillion. So in the span of one lifetime, we have gone from $380 billion to $20 trillion. And, Mr. President, that has consequences. Now, maybe that doesn't have consequences for a man who is 60 years old. Maybe it does. I believe it does. But beyond a shadow of a doubt, no matter which side of this you want to be on, it has consequences for our children and grandchildren. And so, you see, it isn't about an individual rider, an individual program. It is about the fact that we are spending this great nation into an absolutely hopeless abyss. And if we don't come to grips with that, if we don't come to grips with this, this won't turn out, and it won't turn out for anybody. Now, when I came here 2 years ago, I was stunned. Every conversation was, how do we spend more? I thought there'd be a stimulus package when I was elected to the Senate. I thought maybe it'd even be a package that I would support. And then somebody said it had to be a $500 billion package, all borrowed money. And I started getting really squeamish about that. And then somebody outbid him, said, no, I think it's got to be a $750 billion package. And then I really got squeamish, and I knew I couldn't support that. And then somebody raised the ante, and by the time this is all done with interest, we borrowed from China and other places $1 trillion. And I thought, my goodness, we'll take a breather here at some point. There was no breather. There was a health care bill with more gimmicks and scoring than you could possibly imagine. And here we are today fighting over whether this continuing resolution should be $30 billion in cuts, $60 billion in cuts. Quite honestly, in the grand scheme of what our nation is facing, that is pitiful. It's almost tragic. Because if we don't come to grips with this soon, the big picture, this absolutely is going to destroy any future that our kids and grandkids might have hoped for in the United States of America. Now, hope springs eternal. I look at the glass as half full all the time. I think we're going to get through this. I think we'll deal with the issues before us. Maybe in ways that some like, some dislike. But if we don't come together somehow, some way, and deal with what the real issue is, and that is we're spending a great nation into the Stone Age, we are going to be a lesser nation than any of us could have ever imagined. And that affects every priority. That affects Medicaid, Social Security, education, national defense, homeland security, you name your priority, it affects it all. So today I count myself as one who wants to come down here to the floor at some point before the day is out and vote to solve this problem. But then I want to do all I can to work with my colleagues to deal with what is really facing us, which is debt that is out of control, spending that is out of control, with a situation where no budget was submitted, not a single appropriations bill, and that's where we find ourselves today, trying to patch this together because we didn't come to grips with the budget process last year. And, Mr. President, that doesn't seem right to me. With that, Mr. President, I conclude my remarks, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Alaska.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise today to really just ask a simple question. What are we doing here? What are we doing jeopardizing our economic recovery to just score political points? I have to agree with my friend and colleague from Nebraska. I am optimistic also. And that we have agreed on a $78 billion reduction to the 2011 budget. The glass isn't half full, it is more than three-quarters full. We're grandstanding over the federal budget when we should be focused on making sure American families can make their monthly budgets and get back to work. I'm not here to downplay the need to cut the federal deficit. I agree with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle. We need to make real cuts now. We have already committed to the deepest cuts to discretionary spending since World War II. That we are already halfway through the fiscal year, these cuts are a good down payment on even more progress in our fiscal 2012 budget and beyond. As a member of the Senate Budget Committee, I'm already putting forward concrete recommendations for more cuts in the future budget years, such as the eliminating orphan earmarks, saving upwards to $1 billion, cutting subsidies for millionaire farmers, saving, again, billions of dollars, cutting tax loopholes, saving tens of billions of dollars. Shutting down the government is not going to get us any closer to the real goal of reducing the deficit. We didn't save a single dime during the last shutdown. In fact, it cost American taxpayers $1.4 billion, and the economic costs were even more. Dozens of military construction projects are stalled right now, putting at risk hundreds of jobs this summer and need improvements to Alaska's military base. I've talked to these contractors, these individuals that are waiting for us to get our work done, to get certainty to their ability, over $250 million pending and waiting for the work to be done. Military families also caught in the middle. The military will get paid, but the uncertainty of when they will get paid, because this will be a waiting on us to pass a bill, is unfair. We should push harder to work out a compromise for them. At the same time, civilian construction projects and the jobs created by them for docks, housing, facilities are also at risk. Critical contracts to move forward on the land transfers to the state of Alaska and Alaska Native corporations will not get done in time for the summer work. Alaska businesses looking to start new operations won't be able to get the SBA loans. Families won't get the FHA or the USDA home loans. And the tax refunds that people have sent in their taxes by mail won't be processed. And key permits to onshore oil and gas development, which have been painfully slow to move forward, will be even stalled further. When I was home this past week, I heard directly from some of more than 17,000 federal workers in Alaska about their concerns. It might be easy for some to criticize public employees, but in Alaska, these workers are members of our communities. They contribute to our economy, pay taxes, and they provide critical services for my state, all across my state. Many are getting by paycheck to paycheck. A shutdown could mean their rent doesn't get paid, their mortgage is put at risk, their bank accounts won't balance. We cannot and should not play politics with their jobs just because we're not doing our job. Americans, Alaskans are frustrated. They're wondering what the heck we're doing here. And I agree with them. It's only been 3 months since the new Congress convened. Not much to report back home to the Alaskans that are working every day making progress in our state. It's past time to get back to work. Roll up our sleeves, finish this budget, and put the 2012 budget on the table, and focus on the economy and creating jobs. Our economy is starting to turn the corner. Frankly, the many steps Congress took over the last 2 years to rebuild this economy are working. Unemployment dipped to 8.8%. 216,000 jobs created last month, the largest increase since last May. And TARP, which we all had mixed feelings on, is not only being paid back, it's returning a profit back to the federal government. Let's not put a wrench in our economy, in our economic recovery. These are good data points, but we're far from getting the job done. The economy is still fragile. Rising gas prices will make it harder. We need to show voters and the folks back home we can work together on deficit reduction, but also tackle energy legislation, tax reform, small business support, and education investment. I know it won't be easy to get all this done, but this is what folks in my state sent me back here to do, to get the work done, balance the budget, reduce spending, and continue to invest in growing our economy. I will always tell Alaskans, when I get back home that all the easy issues are done. Only the hard ones are left. But that's why we're here. Mr. President, it's time for us to get back to work. Thank you. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that the period for morning business for debate only be extended until 6 p.m. with senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each, with Majority Leader to be recognized at 6 p.m.
Is there objection? Hearing no objection, so ordered.
I yield the floor, Mr. President.
Thank you.
Mr. President.
The senator from Wyoming.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I come to the floor today, as so many of my colleagues have, to discuss the situation that we find ourselves in. And many ask, well, what has happened? Why are we here? Why is there so much coverage and concern about a potential shutdown of the United States government? And I was on a radio station report from Washington by phone to Wyoming earlier this morning with a friend of mine, and he was asking, he said, how did we get into this situation and what can we do about it? Well, there are two different situations that we're in. One is that we're in a situation because a budget that should have been passed 7 months ago when the Democrats were in charge of the House, in charge of the Senate, and in the White House, that budget, a responsible budget, was never passed. And that is what we're dealing with today in one part. The bigger part of how we got into this situation is that we are a nation in significant debt. We owe a remarkably large amount of money. $14 trillion is the number that is consistently discussed. Very few people have a concept of exactly how much money that is. But yet we owe that money. And people say, who do we owe it to? I visited with a group of high school students from Douglas, Wyoming earlier this week. And I asked them, do you know who we owe the money to? And they said, yeah, we owe it, a lot of it, to China. Mr. President, that's a great concern to the people of America. The people are concerned about our national security, our financial security, that how we as a nation are viewed in the world and how we view ourselves. And as families across this country, we live within our means. We balance our budgets every year. You know, I'm from Wyoming, where according to our Constitution, we must balance our budget every year. And we do. And that's why we have money available for scholarships and other opportunities for young people as we invest the money that we have saved from year to year in our people, in our future, in our communities, in our land. And yet Washington doesn't seem to learn that lesson even today. So here we are with this situation where we're looking at a potential of a shutdown of the government because this government has maxed out its credit card. Others may decide to no longer extend credit to us, and it has come down to the final hour. Every day, this government spends $4 billion more than it takes in. Last month, Washington spent 8 times as much money as it took in. Every American child is now born owing $45,000. This is a travesty, Mr. President. So when I take a look at this and say, we know now how we got into this situation, we have overspent. Our problem isn't that we're taxed too little, it's that we spend too much. The American people understand that. So what we need to do is get the spending under control. We need to spend less. Now, we are at a situation where you say, what can we do about it right now, today? Well, for those same high school students who were here from Douglas, Wyoming, they know that a bill starts in the House and then goes to the Senate, is passed by one body, passed by another body, goes to the President for his signature. So here we are. We do have a bill that has been passed by the House of Representatives to keep the government open, to keep the government functioning. And I am ready right now to vote for that bill. Well, what has the President of the United States said about that? The President has threatened to veto that bill. He said he would veto a bill that would temporarily extend and keep the government open for 1 week. So apparently the President isn't interested in keeping this government open for the next week through tonight at midnight. I would wish he would take a different tack and say, let's continue to work on the overall problem but keep the government functioning. You know, families all around this country, and I talk to people every weekend in Wyoming, they're worried about the cost and the quality of their own lives. And when they look at this incredible debt coming out of Washington, they say, how is this going to continue to impact? You know, families around Wyoming and all around the country and the states are finding that they're going to pay about $700 more for fuel this year than they did last year because of the pain of the pump. And of course, I believe that's been made worse by the policies of this administration. But for families who are with kids and with bills and with a mortgage, $700 increased gasoline prices impacts on the money they have available for other things. So it's a direct impact on the quality of their lives. And they're looking back here to Washington saying, what are these people doing? I had a call yesterday in my office from a man in the military. He said, why aren't they going to continue to fund the military? Well, that's part of the bill that's passed the House that will continue to keep the military funded, functioning. And he said, you know, I'm not worried about me. He said, I'm worried about these younger guys, the newer ones in the military, the men and women who may have a young family. I want to make sure that they're taken care of. He said, don't worry about me. Worry about them. Think about each and every one of those young men and women who are in uniform, who are defending our country. Why would the President say, if you pass what the House has passed, which does cut some spending and keeps the military functioning, I will veto it? That's what the President of the United States said. He would veto it. Rather than keep everything functioning and fund the military, the President has said he would veto it because it was only a one-week extension so that all of the other issues could be worked out. Now remember, Mr. President, all we're talking about is this year's budget. We're now, 7 months into the fiscal year. This is something that should have been done last year, but the Democrats have absolutely failed to live up to their obligations of passing a budget, certainly failed the obligations of living within the budget, but there is a proposal today to keep the government open, to fund the troops, and yet I hear the President of the United States say no. Now, there's been discussion on this floor about things that are called policy riders. And it was interesting because today in the Politico, there's a headline, Dems embraced policy riders in the past. And what sort of policy riders? When I hear on the floor, oh, no, policy riders are all bad. Well, the repeal of a school voucher program in the District of Columbia, that was a policy rider in the past. Travel to Cuba, that was a policy rider the Democrats put in the past. And it mentions a project, they call it a pet project of the majority leader, and it says delaying the development of Yucca Mountain as a nuclear waste storage site as part of a policy rider on a budget bill issue. So this is something that to me is not new, to this body is not new. What is new is that the President of the United States has threatened to veto and to shut down the government of this country because he will not deal with a bill that will fund our troops and will make cuts in spending because it is for a time-limited issue at a time when we ought to say, let's keep the government open and let us fund the military. So who, in fact, would be wanting for there to be a shutdown? I'm not looking for that sort of thing, Mr. President. And then I see there is someone who has actually been rooting for a shutdown. It's a former chairman of the Democratic National Committee, Howard Dean. These are the things he said about a shutdown. He said, quote, if I was head of the Democratic National Committee, I would be quietly rooting for it. He went on to say, from a partisan point of view, I think it would be the best thing in the world, the former chairman of the Democratic National Committee said, to have a shutdown. Is that what we need, Mr. President, a partisan point of view? What we need are solutions for America, Mr. President. And now I see that there are colleagues on the floor ready to speak. So with that, Mr. President, I ask that we come to a solution, deal with the issues of the incredible amount of debt, keep the government going, pass what has passed the House, fund the troops, cut the spending, and get this to the President to sign. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The Senator from Colorado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I wanted to take the floor for a few minutes to talk about where I was supposed to be today, which is Denver, Colorado, not on this floor, because we were hosting a town hall meeting in Denver, Mark Udall and I were, to discuss our long-term deficit and debt problems. And we had invited Senator Simpson from Wyoming. My colleague from Wyoming just spoke, a great Republican senator, the co-chair of the President's Deficit and Debt Commission, to Denver for this session. And he agreed to come. The former head of the Office of Management and Budget got on a plane, flew to Denver. They agreed to come. But more important, and some others, more important than that, we put this out to the public, and it was almost immediately oversubscribed. So many people wanted to get in, to have a real conversation, an authentic conversation about what we're going to do finally to dig out from underneath this incredible deficit and debt that we face. I inconvenienced a lot of people inviting them to Denver, but they are happy to do it anyway because they're so committed to this set of issues, and they think having a conversation in the center of our country, in our Rocky Mountain West, about these issues may allow some common sense to prevail. But the inconvenience they've suffered by traveling to Denver is nothing compared to the inconvenience, to say the least, that the American people are going to suffer if this government shuts down. And it's not just 850,000 federal employees. It's the fact that we've got troops deployed all across the globe, small businesses trying to get loans from the SBA, homeowners or people that hope to become homeowners trying to get a mortgage through the FHA. All of that will shut down if this government shuts down, not to mention the fact that we've been told that the shutdown will cost our economy, Mr. President, at least $8 billion a week, that this government is shut down. 0.2% of GDP growth for every week this government is shut down, just at a time when our economy is starting to show some sign of life. Now, I've said on the floor over the last couple of days that no local government official in my state, none, zero, Republican or Democrat, would ever say, we're going to close the government. We've decided that we can't get along, we can't agree, we can't figure it out, so the city and county of Denver is going to close. The city of Grand Junction will close, or this school district is going to close. No one in Colorado would think to say that to their constituents, and we shouldn't think about it either. Some people say, wow, there must be some incredibly significant disagreement that's keeping the House and the Senate from working together to get this done, Republicans and Democrats from working together to get this done. Last night I brought a slide to show just what that disagreement looks like, Mr. President, and this was yesterday. You know, I've heard some people say that there is agreement on the number of cuts that we're going to make today and last night. But yesterday the parties were several billion dollars apart. That's what was said. And so I made a chart that showed the American people what that meant. $7 billion is what I assigned to the difference. That's probably more than the difference was, and it certainly is more than it is today. And that's a lot of money, by the way. But we have a $3.5 trillion operating budget and a $1.6 trillion deficit. So I wanted to show, Mr. President, what the dispute looked like compared to our deficit and compared to our operating budget. And sorry, but I couldn't fit it on one chart. It actually is on two charts. And I couldn't get enough charts or hold them together because this is the operating budget over here, Mr. President. I would need two more of these posters on top of this to be able to show you the relationship between the so-called dispute and our operating budget. I've spent half my life in business and half my life working in local government, and I can tell you that this is a meaningless dispute, utterly meaningless. Look at it. And it has nothing to do with our long-term deficit and debt problem. It has nothing to do with the good people in Colorado are talking about today at the forum that I'm not going to be able to attend. So in view of that, it seems to me that taking the risk of closing our government down, charging our economy an $8 billion note every week, and concerning our troops who should not be worried about whether they're going to get a paycheck with that makes no sense at all. So my hope is this, I see other colleagues on the floor, is that the leadership of both parties in the Senate and the House and our President in the next several hours will seal a deal that makes sure that our government stays open. But beyond that, to all of my colleagues in this body, looking forward to the negotiation we're going to have on the debt ceiling, looking forward to the negotiation we're going to have on our deficit and our debt, I hope we can come together and agree on a process and a structure that actually leads us to agreement rather than one that leads us in the direction we've been in over the last 2 or 3 weeks. Our country simply can't afford for us not to get our job done and be distracted by disagreements that are meaningless to people in their daily lives. I know we can do better. I know we can do better as Democrats and Republicans, and once we get through this, I want to say, Mr. President, I will do absolutely everything I can to build bipartisan support for a solution to our fiscal problems. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
President.
The senator from Alabama.
Mr. President, if the differences are meaningless, maybe Democrat colleagues would agree, and we'd have an agreement if it's so insignificant. But it's not really totally insignificant. If you take $61 billion in spending down from the baseline as the House budget, the House legislation that they have passed and sent here does, it reduces spending by $61 billion. If you do that, it reduces the baseline $61 billion. My staff on the Budget Committee, I'm ranking Republican, has calculated that and concluded that will save $860 billion over 10 years. Those numbers have not been disputed. We've used them repeatedly. In fact, so it does make a difference. We're on the wrong trajectory. We need to get on the right trajectory. Our Democratic colleagues, it seems, have to be dragged kicking and screaming out of denial and into the reality that we are spending too much. We're running up too much debt. I'm pleased to see that they have agreed to consider these proposals and passed a couple of continuing resolutions to fund the government at a slightly lower level. That's progress. And we've avoided shutdowns to this date. Hopefully we can avoid another one. But if we have another short-term agreement today, it is nowhere close to what is needed to put our country on a sound financial course. That is true. To avoid another recession, as we have been warned we are facing if we do not change. To ensure future prosperity for all Americans. That's what we've got to do. This spasm has come about because our Democratic colleagues last year failed. Didn't even bring to the floor a budget. They passed not a single appropriations bill last year on the floor of the Senate and still have not brought to the floor any legislation to even begin to form a budget for this year and to propose any funding for the last 6 months of this fiscal year. We haven't seen legislation about that. So they want to meet in secret and talk and negotiate. The House has passed legislation that funds the government, that funds the military through the end of the year, reduces $61 billion. They've also sent another bill. They sent legislation over that says, okay, we'll do one more week with a smaller reduction of $12 billion, and we'll fund the military. And let's do that if you don't want to agree to the full agreement for the rest of the year. So the lack of action is only in one chamber. That's this chamber. Has the Senate proposed any new legislation? No. But what our colleagues, I hate to say it, I'm saying this really not quite as critical as it probably sounds. They just haven't comprehended the plain fact that business as usual is over. They think this country can continue to spend like we've been doing. They think these huge deficits can be funded, it seems, out of thin air without consequence, that we can borrow unlimited amounts, $1.6 trillion to fund the government this year. Borrow that without consequence. They think the American people will not support and they'll defeat members of Congress who stand up and tell the truth about the condition we're in and who have the gumption to take real steps to reduce spending. They think it is inconceivable that our government spending levels can actually be reduced. They think if they plan a 3% increase in spending and it gets increased to only 1%, the government has suffered a 2% cut. That's the way they talk about it. That's why we're broke. That kind of accounting. They think the government can create money, create wealth out of nothing. We can just pass a law and it becomes so. They ignore the fact that debts must be paid, and interest on our debt has to be paid. Expert after expert has told the Congress, who've written papers and articles and op-eds, that we are on an unsustainable path. There is not one expert that I know of who would deny that the budget submitted to the Congress just a few weeks ago by the President of the United States, President Obama, is sound. Indeed, President Obama's choice to head the Debt Commission, Erskine Bowles, when the budget was first announced, said it's nowhere close to what is needed to avoid our fiscal nightmare. This is a man he appointed to head the Debt Commission who has spent weeks and months taking testimony about the financial condition of America. The man he asked to sum up the kind of problem that we have and how to get out of it. Now, the American people, I think they understand it. They've been shocked by the irresponsibility shown by Congress. They've been shocked by what we've been doing. This is 4 years ago, our deficit was $162 billion. It jumped to $450. Then the next year was $1.3 trillion. The next year, $1.2 trillion. The next year, this year, September 30th, is projected to be $1.5, $1.6 trillion. We're on a completely unsustainable course. President Obama's budget, as scored by the Congressional Budget Office, shows that in the 10th year, the projected deficit would be $1.2 trillion. This year we take in $2.2 trillion, we spend $3.7. 40% of what we are spending this year is borrowed. That's why this is an unsustainable course. There is no other alternative than to acknowledge that. The American people have sent letters, emails, telegrams, phone calls, attended town meetings, had conferences to try to save this country we love from the fiscal nightmare Chairman Bowles said awaits us if we don't take real action. Is that something wrong with that? Should they not be upset with Congress, who are going down a path without any attempt to get off this path with the most reckless debts we've ever seen in the history of America and with no end in sight to it? These concerned Americans, many of whom have not been active politically before, they did one more thing. They went to the polls and they voted. They voted for new candidates they felt would take the action necessary to protect America from financial disaster and to defend the bedrock of our legal system, the Constitution of the United States of America. The result was a colossal and historic shellacking of the big spenders. Those who said things are fine, we in Washington will take care of you. Don't question us. We'll pass a federal takeover of health care. I know you don't want it, but we know better. Isn't that what they said? We are progressives. We're smart. We're educated. More than you. We know deficits don't really matter. Countries have deficits all the time. While you don't understand, we know that we have to bail out these bankers and these financiers, these Wall Street big shots, because principles of responsibility and accountability don't really apply, because we know better. We're smarter. Your old principles are fuddy-duddy. Following the rules is not important. Words don't have fixed meanings. The Constitution doesn't really apply. You know, it's old. It's out of date. Just leave us alone with your money and the power to borrow, and we'll take care of you. Trust us. Well, that didn't sit well with the American people this last election. And they sent a message, in my opinion, that was crystal clear. So should anybody be surprised? Should there be any surprise that when 64 new members of Congress who had run and won elections on promising to do something about reckless spending didn't rubber stamp the Senate President's proposal to fund increased funding through the rest of the fiscal year? That they insisted that reductions occur, and they sent over a $61 billion reduction, which out of a $3,700 billion budget is not much, about 1%. States are reducing spending far more than that. And so we have a choice, don't we? What is the choice? Business as usual, or taking the tough steps like governors, mayors, county commissioners, families are making this very moment? Our governor in Alabama announced a 15% reduction in spending in the general